don't know why it was muted. It wasn't muted here on my little thing. It wasn't muted anywhere. We're just listening to some feeding the ducks while everybody gets in here. Well, hopefully everybody is having a wonderful day today. We didn't do any live streams over the weekend. I was just letting some of the news build up, so we got a lot to talk about today. All right, we'll turn down the music. Miss the good old feeding the ducks. Don't play it as much as we used to. Hopefully everyone's doing good today. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. All right, we got enough people in here now. We can start to talk about some of the stuff we got going on. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. The last live stream I did was on Friday. My dog is playing with a toy, so if you hear some noise, that's what's going on over here. I hope everyone's doing fantastic. We have quite a bit to talk about today. Obviously, the death of the Iranian president is going to be on the docket. We have Vladimir Putin took a trip to Beijing and met with Xi, so we're going to be talking about that today. We have a ton of updates in the SMO area in Ukraine with the war, so we got a lot of map updates to cover. We got some events that we're going to talk about, and we have a IIC arrest warrant that just came out for Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. So again, another event that we're going to talk about. Sorry, my dog is chewing on this huge red thing, so stop it. I don't want to listen to that. All right. And he's going to go grab it. All right. So first and foremost, we should just touch on the Iran stuff. I think that the Iran stuff is probably what everybody wants to talk about. It is a very significant event. It comes at a very interesting time. So, you know, a lot of people initially rushed to Mossad. Israel was responsible. You know, we heard of a crash that happened. We didn't know what had actually happened. Usually when helicopters crash, the people on board don't survive. In this case, it wasn't any different. There was some very, very poor weather at the time that the Iranian president and his Minister of Foreign Affairs, I believe, were heading out of Azerbaijan. Their helicopter then crashed. There was a 12-hour search and rescue. If you guys look up any of the videos of the weather, it was fog basically on the ground, heavy rain, 5-meter visibility. I have some questions about the whole event. I'm going to talk on those because there's just a lot going on with the death of the Iranian president and this helicopter crash. First and foremost, it took the Iranians something around 12 hours to locate the crash and recover the bodies. In total, I believe 9 people died. The president, the foreign minister, and 7 other passengers. I believe the 7 other passengers includes the crew. Everybody on the helicopter died. It was a American or Canadian Bell helicopter. So not that it matters. It was a very old helicopter. Not necessarily something I think you would be transporting the president in, but you know, not my area of expertise there. You know, I'm not a helicopter guy, so I don't know exactly. It could be a very dependable helicopter. I'm not sure, but the fact that they could not locate it via transponder is very, very weird to me. The fact that it took 12 hours to find your president is very weird to me. I mean, could you imagine if the United States president went missing in a helicopter crash? I mean, first off, it's Marine Force One, so everybody would know exactly where it is. But even in fog and even in horrible weather, I mean, we would know where it is. We would be able to find it right away. We would get the president or his body out of wherever that was and, you know, move it. So very, very weird to me, the whole event. You know, I'm not a huge Iran supporter. I'm not Muslim myself, so you know the culture and the religion and the country as it is not necessarily near and dear to me. I don't have any connection to it, so like, a lot of people, especially on social media, for some reason, they get the idea that I'm this like militant pro-Russian or something. And when you're on that side of the political spectrum, I guess you also have to be pro-China, pro-Iran, pro-North Korea, like the whole axis of evil thing. No, I mean it's just another event, and particularly when it comes to these countries that are constantly at war with Israel. I mean, and I don't mean just Israel in general, but any country that accepts martyrdom as sort of their position, and that's how they go forward in life. It's the entire Iranian government is meant to be killed off and replaced. So this doesn't really interfere with everything as much as I think people suspect, and I really don't see why Mossad would have done this. I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't. I don't. It's very, very underhanded, and I'm not putting that past the Israelis. I would just need to see some significant evidence that this plane was brought down via an explosive device or something like that, which may very well happen. But for me right now, I think I'm just gonna leave it there. It's just it's one of those stories. It's one of those events where we can talk about potential implications, but what's probably going to happen is they've already scheduled elections for late June. They're going to have elections. Somebody with the exact same ideals is going to step into the position that the former president was in, and things are going to carry on as normal. I don't think that's going to change anything. So there's that. All right. Yeah, I planted the bomb on the chopper, and that's why I wasn't on here yesterday. And anytime something like that happens, where am I at? You never know where I'm at. And other news in the Middle East, the IIC, or the International Criminal Court, has come out and suggested. I don't think that they've actually got warrants yet for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu for his actions in Gaza. If you are a believer in the International Criminal Court, I particularly am not. The International Criminal Court is one of these extremely biased political tools that the West often uses, and it's kind of funny to see it now being used against the Biden administration after the Biden administration had just used it previously against Putin. So the IIC came out 2 years ago. I believe it was about 2 years ago now, and issued a warrant, or maybe it was a year ago, actually. I think it was a year ago. Issued a warrant for Vladimir Putin's arrest, I believe, along with some other individuals in the military, if they are to step into a country where ICC jurisdiction is accepted. And Putin has stepped in countries where the ICC is what would you call it? Enforced, their warrants and stuff like that. But nobody's going to arrest Vladimir Putin. I mean, that's a declaration of war against the Russian Federation. So, in general, these warrants, they're kind of they're almost fake. They don't really mean anything, because the reality of actually capturing somebody and sending them to The Hague is, I mean, you're either if you're at the Hague already, you're on the losing side, right? So it doesn't really matter where this kangaroo court session occurs. It's fake. They did it. They did this with Putin. Whatever you think about Putin, the warrant is completely ridiculous. And calling what Putin is doing in Ukraine a genocide. I mean, I guess you could say, by the very definition of genocide, in that you are potentially forcibly removing people from their homes. Usually you don't consider collateral damage of civilians to be genocide. That's not usually how it usually has to be a specific targeted attack against civilians. And a lot of what happens in even Gaza with this other arrest warrant, a lot of that is also collateral damage. I mean, Hamas does hide among civilians, but Israel has also gone out of their way to extensively target civilians. So the arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and some of his members of cabinet actually makes a lot more sense than the Putin warrant. for what they claimed, they're issuing the warrant for Putin for. Along with this, the recommendation was also proposed by the ICC for arrest warrants for the negotiating members of Hamas, I believe, at least one of the negotiators, and potentially some other leadership of Hamas was also issued. I think that was kind of to counterbalance this sort of landmark ruling that they were going to issue a warrant for Netanyahu. He's in trouble. The war in Gaza is not going the way that they had planned. I mean, it's 8 months now past when they started, so it's been too long for that operation. Too long on the Israeli economy. The West is starting to tire of this war in Gaza. The way the Israelis want to finish it right now is unacceptable to the Biden administration before elections. But Netanyahu can't let the situation in Gaza go on for another year. So there's this impasse that's being met, and I believe that the leadership in the West now is trying to get rid of Netanyahu, trying to get him out and get somebody else in. Obviously, the United States comes out and very hypocritically says that they do not accept the ruling of the ICC that Netanyahu rightfully deserves this arrest warrant for his participation in the genocide in Gaza, this, that, and the other, which is hilarious because when it was Putin, it was fine and the court was just and their ruling was absolute. But when it was one of the West's allies, doesn't play the same, does it? Which is a big part of my issue and a big part of why I get on here and I talk about this stuff is for exactly this reason. You see just blatant hypocrisy and this whole international rules-based order is great for thee, but not for me, right? When it benefits my bias and my what I need, it satisfies my needs. It works. International law is right and good. And then the second it doesn't fall in line with what I need, international law doesn't matter. So that's a big issue that I have, and that's a lot of the reason why I talk about this stuff. But those are some of the things I wanted to talk about. I'm actually going to get over to the map now, guys. Thank you for sticking with me through my little rant there. Those two topics I believe needed to be discussed. I'm going to talk about Putin's trip to Beijing here in a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and take us over to the map, and we are going to look at some updates in the war in Ukraine. Also, guys, remember, this is a good time to pause. Now that we have a lot of viewers in here, if you guys are interested in finding my work elsewhere, if you are on YouTube, you can go to the link in the YouTube description. Go to the links in the description of this YouTube video. You can find my Twitter, my Telegram for constant updates. And if you wish to support me, you can go and subscribe to my Patreon. On my Patreon, you will find the demonetized episodes. Those are episodes that contain combat footage and basically anything that if I were to play it here for you guys, I would get demonetized by YouTube. So you can go check that out over there and support me that way. Also, if you wanted to support me in another way or have a question for me, you can ask questions through super chats and I will answer those live on air. If you ask questions just in the chat, I might get to them and see them. I'm not always constantly looking at the chat. All right, over to the map. Let me get rid of my ugly mug so you guys can just see the good old map here. As you can see, we have some green. Obviously, you guys know that blue is the Ukrainian advances. If there are any, there are not currently any on the map. The Ukrainians do not have the initiative anywhere and are on the defensive everywhere. You can see that the green are the Russian advances, and there are a significant number. Now, remember, this is 3 days worth of Russian advances, but these advances are nonetheless still very significant. So just south of Lukansky, the Russians have improved this flank, again, pushing out onto this high ground. And there are reports that the Russians have entered Lipsy down here, which is the first town in the string of towns that we would consider the outer reaches of Kharkov. So the urban conglomerate that is Kharkov I would say extends down here to Tudhiv, up here to Lipsy, over here to Derhachi. And then, just out in these little tentacles, all of these little towns, Maref out here, Borova down here. This is all the greater Kharkov area. So the Russians are now entering into this greater Kharkov area, which basically means they have a straight road into the city. I don't believe that the Russians are going to push for the city. They do not have the manpower to effectively do that. The Ukrainians have moved a ton of reserves up into this area to try to stop this Russian advance. The Russian goal up here, again, is to pull reserves and to create a sanitary zone around the border to prevent the shelling of Belgorod, civilian areas in this region that the Ukrainians continue to do, as well as cross-border activities, operations. I don't know what to call them. The Ukrainians consistently cross the border and die, and then run away and come back across. So I don't know what you would call that operation. Some guerrilla war tactics that never really worked out and never, resulted in anything. The Russians are doing that exact same thing, except successfully holding the territory and forcing the Ukrainians back. Again, I don't think this is going to go very deep. I don't think you're looking at a very large operation here, at least for the time being. I believe that the larger operation is going to come in the southern Donetsk area down here. And this Kharkov operation is just eating away at Ukrainian resources right now. Yeah, cross-border raids. All right. And so here in the city of Volvychansk, this is not a little city, by the way. This is a pretty large urban area on the border. The Russians now control the entire northern area, basically everything north of the Vovocha River here. The Russians control. That means that the Russians control all of the high ground as well that looks down onto the low ground of this side of the Vovocha. The Russians have also crossed the Vovocha River right here. They were already across it on this edge, but now they are across it right here, and they likely have control over this bridge crossing, probably destroyed, but you can probably still cross on foot in this area if this river is low enough in certain parts. So the Russians have crossed, and they are going to begin working into the southern part of Volvychansk. And remember that Volvychansk is the first town on the Ukrainian defense line in this region. So if the Russians penetrate and capture all of Volvychansk, they will have penetrated that first defense line, and they will be able to begin working up and down it and unraveling it in that manner. Again, remember, this is a small Russian incursion. This is not a major Russian offensive. This is at most 55,000 troops along this entire region. So this is probably around 20,000 troops total on the ground fighting in this area. This is just not an extremely large area. And then you have artillery, aviation, and everything supporting it, logistics and whatnot. But probably around 20,000 total troops in this area. And not all of those are on the front line either. Those are the ones that are being rotated in reserve, ready to push, fighting in different areas of the front. Yeah, Volvychansk is about the same size as Avdiivka, for those of you wondering, pre-war population-wise. But also Avdiivka had a pretty low pre-war population. So, okay, moving down here, it is reported that the entire urban area of Bilohorivka has been captured. I don't know if that includes these houses. I don't know where some of these towns have really weird boundaries where, there will be houses still, but they're not considered in the township. They're outside of the township. So the report is that all of Bilohorivka has been captured by the Russians. The quarry has not been captured by the Russians. It is still under Ukrainian control. So the Russians are, again, moving in this area. This area had not seen any movement for months, years, actually. And so this is a very big deal that the Russians are moving again here, and the likely reason why they're moving all across the map, and what you'll see is a common pattern that I'll bring up, is that the Ukrainians are being suffocated in this Kharkov region. They brought up their new Bogdana artillery brigade. I think it's the 16th Artillery Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. I just retweeted about it. Excuse me. They brought those in. We've seen 5 of them destroyed of the 30 that they had. So, large portions of your artillery force are getting destroyed. I think we've seen 12 grads destroyed in this region in a week. It's just pulling a lot of resources. And when all of those resources get pulled, what ends up happening is the areas that you thought were safe, like Bilohorivka, suddenly get a slightly reduced manpower allottage or artillery shell allottage, ammo, whatever, drones, whatever is being used to hold this area so effectively gets moved up to Kharkov, and then the Russians see the opportunity and advance. And then once and then if you come back to stabilize it, you've already lost the good defensive position you had. Once Bilohorivka is lost and the Russians re-enter into this Donetsk region, it's really hard to hold this stretch to Seversk. This push out to Bilohorivka for the Ukrainians during the last offensive really bought them a lot of time, because the Russians were, I think, right around Shrubyanka, right here, and close to Seversk. And remember, they were coming down this road to Seversk at different times as well. So this is definitely going to become a problem for the Ukrainians very soon. The Seversk salient has held immaculately for a very long time, but now it's beginning to bulge. All right. Heading over to Chasiv Yar, we have a massive Russian gain. They have pushed into the micro-district, the canal micro-district here, obviously separated by the canal from the greater Chasiv Yar. And if you guys remember, Chasiv Yar is on this high ground right here that runs along the canal. And if this high ground falls, the Russians will look down on Kramatorsk, Druskivka, Konstantinivka, this whole urban conglomerate here, which is the last line of defense in the east, will be on the low ground with the Russians on the high ground. So holding Chasiv Yar is of the utmost importance. Same with Kleshchivka, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But the Russians have gone on the offensive in this sector. A lot of the Ukrainians were pointing out that the Russians lost a few armored vehicles in this assault. They showed a video that was highly edited. And it's always funny that after a quote unquote repelled attack by the Russians that resulted in multiple armored vehicle losses, the Russians always end up gaining territory afterwards. So again, the Russians have advanced through this field into this micro-district. It is likely that the Ukrainians have retreated from a majority of the micro-district across this bridge. Remember, the Russians have already crossed the canal over the land bridge part right here, where the canal goes underground. So the Russians are likely already across and applying pressure to this bridge area. Once the micro-district falls, the Russians are going to move north into Kalinina, and then probably going to try to cross into northern Chasiv Yar from Kalinina along the high ground. Again, controlling the high ground is going to be the most important for the Russians. And then to the south, Kleshchivka. The reason why the Ukrainians have held this so desperately is because, well, actually, I'll just show you guys. The good old topographical map that you guys love to see. I'm going to take you over and we're going to look at that real fast. Here we go. Okay, so here's Bakhmut. Here's Chasiv Yar. You can see how Chasiv Yar is on this high ground. Again, I'll zoom out just so you guys can see. Here's that high ground that Chasiv Yar is on along the canal. You can see the canal is this line right here. Let me make sure this looks good. Okay. You can see it along this line. If the Russians gain control of this, they will look down on Kramatorsk, Druskivka, Konstantinivka, this urban conglomerate right here. So that's what we're looking at. Zoom in, and you can see why Kleshchivka is so important. So Kleshchivka itself is on the low ground, but the fortification on this high ground right here is of the utmost importance to the entire Ukrainian defense. Part of the reason why the Ukrainians went on the offensive in this area while the other counteroffensive was going on was because they saw a specific opportunity to exploit Russian weakness in this area. And I don't mean Russian weakness as in, I'll explain it here. The Russians had been moving equipment to the south, to the Zaporozhye front, to blunt this counteroffensive, which they needed to do. They did so successfully. And that ended up making both of these operations basically a failure. But the success of this Bakhmut operation for the Ukrainians was not the capture of Kleshchevka. Kleshchevka is just what happens when you capture this high ground right here. So this high ground with these hill fortifications, these trench networks up here, this is the goal. Kleshchevka is nothing. Andriivka is actually a little bit of a high ground, which is why they're able to hold this portion of Kleshchevka. I'll show you guys on my map in just a second when we go back. But here's that canal that runs right up. So the canal is a physical barrier that the Ukrainians have to deal with to maintain their positions over here, whereas the Russians have to deal with this geographical barrier of the Ukrainians being on this hill to take this area. Once the Russians capture this hill, like Wagner had previously, if you guys remember, Kleshchevka was captured. Wagner captured this hill fortification and had pushed up all the way to right about here around Ivanivsky. And that was unacceptable for the Ukrainians because if they were able to hold this, first off, Ivanivsky would have been choked out. Bakhmut would have been choked out. All of, Kharkov, all of this area would have been choked. So the Ukrainians had to push the Russians out of this hill section. Once the Russians recapture this hill section, they will be able to easily cross the canal. They will be on a level high ground, and they'll be able to move down here into Stopochki, which then will allow them to put massive amounts of pressure on Konstantinivka. And now I'm going to take you back over to my map because I want to show you guys, and this is what I always say, guys. You don't have to be a military guy to look at maps and understand what's going on and what the Russian goal is. So here's Stopochki. Here's that high ground that the Ukrainians still control. You can see how they've lost Ivanivsky, but Ivanivsky wasn't really the most important because it was on the low ground, right? This is the area that Wagner had captured. Basically, all the area on this side of the canal that the Ukrainians now hold is what Wagner had captured. And that was the biggest achievement of what Wagner did around Bakhmut, was capturing this hill. It made the entire Bakhmut operation turn into a horrible grinder for the Ukrainians. And once the Russians recapture this, they'll be able to push into Stopochki, put pressure onto Konstantinivka, and do the same over here. And then, if you guys remember, you go down to my for presentation, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about right here. Remember, I set this up weeks ago for you guys to look at when I was making a little bit of my prediction. And you can kind of see that the Russians are working in that general direction, while this front has moved much slower than I think anybody would have anticipated, considering Kleshchevka has been in a boiler for a very long time. It's just impossible to take until you capture this high ground. And now the Ukrainians are being forced out of this high ground due to Russian advances here to the north. So this is the larger goal, is to push out onto this high ground, capture Stopochki, which is a tiny, less defendable area, and then begin putting pressure onto Konstantinivka, which feeds New York and Toretsk. Doing the same over here, expanding out of Novo Alexandrivka towards this highway, towards this ring road, and then cutting off supply to this New York Toretsk conglomerate right here. At the same time, pushing towards Pokrovsk in the southern direction. Remember, I said the southern Pokrovsk area is going to see the most movement. I think you can already see it. The Ukrainian units are being pulled from this area and being sent up here. So there's a lot going on, guys. I got a message. Okay. Thoughts on the Iranian president heli crash? Will it lead to an escalation? No, I don't think anybody did anything. I think that it was actually just a helicopter crash. And they would have already been blaming, I think, if it would have been a assassination. So personally, I talked about it at the beginning of the episode, but yeah, I just don't think that there's much there. All right. Getting back to the map now, we can see that Kleshchevka, the urban area of Kleshchevka, has almost entirely fallen. Again, on the low ground here, the Russians have this trench fortification right here on the high ground. There is another one on this high ground, which the Russians need to capture. But this pressure up here has made supplying this area much, much more difficult. And you're probably about to see everything on this side of the canal fall to the Russians in short order, just because it's going to be incredibly hard for the Ukrainians to keep anything supplied over here. And remember, once this happens, the Ukrainians lose another one of their bastion defense areas. One of the stronger areas of Ukrainian defense will be gone. The Russians will be on this high ground and be looking on Stepochke and Bielahora and all of these different areas across the canal. So this is another area that you guys need to watch very closely. Remember this? That's what it's going to look like, something like that. And it's going to happen quick, guys. I'm telling you, it's going to be like June's going to be here, and then by July, this map is going to look completely different, and we're going to be talking about cities that we have never talked about before. It's going to be a very, very interesting summer. Over near Alexandropol, the Russians have improved their positions out of Kermak and Novokalinove, pushing out along the highway. The most significant aspect of this is pushing out along this highway, the road, pushing towards, again, Konstantinivka. You can see the general direction. They want to put this into a boiler and force the Ukrainians to retreat from these 8-year fortifications. All right, down here in Netalove, it has been confirmed, fully captured by the Russians, so that page is closed. Again, down here, remember that the Ukrainians have pushed out into Novelske. The Russians still have not pushed out and recaptured this position. These right here are, again, 8-year fortification areas. The lines run right up through this area. So down here in Krasnohorivka, we have seen a major Russian advance. If you look closely here, you can see this is what I mean by 8-year fortifications. You can see these trench lines that have been built. They're basically a part of the earth now. They're everywhere over here. So there's some that even go into, let's see, like this one goes into this house and into the basements of the houses and stuff like that. So these are the fortifications that we're talking about. And the Russians have pushed into this set of fortifications on the east, and almost all of the fortifications on the eastern flank of Krasnohorivka have now fallen. We see another improvement by the Russians into these residential areas. Krasnohorivka is almost now all single-level homes, or 2-story homes, all residential living, not high-rise buildings as much. So it is likely that this portion of Krasnohorivka will fall very quickly once full control over these residential high-rise buildings is established, as well as the hospital and these high-rise buildings over here in the east. As for this part, this is the Ukrainians are probably just going to slowly fight out of this, and they're going to claim that Krasnohorivka isn't taken because they still control this house out here. It's what they always do. So just get ready for that. All right, down here in Horivka, the Russians have captured most of the settlement, not all of it. And then down here, north of Novomihailovka, the Russians have greatly improved their positions in these fields, as well as entered Perskakivka from the east. Remember, I talked about just south of Pyabeta, this is the high ground. This is like the Chasiv Yar high ground. Once this high ground falls, the Russians will be able to push right onto Konstantinivka, a different Konstantinivka than the other one we saw up north. Ukrainians like to double name cities. I mean, so do Americans. How many Springfields are there, I guess? But yeah, so the Russians have improved to the south here through these fields. Again, getting very close to applying pressure directly, like line of sight, on the 0532, which then supplies Ugledar. The whole front is buckling, guys. This whole front right here, from Chasiv Yar down to Ugledar, is just buckling. North of it, Bielahorivka, Seversk, this is doing okay. This is all being held pretty well. But this whole section of the front is just ripe for a breakthrough. And when it happens, it's going to happen quick, and it's going to move fast, guys. All right. I think that's most of my map updates today. I hope everybody's doing good. Go ahead and get some questions in, guys. Get some questions in. I'll answer some questions. I have some articles to go over with you guys, so I'm going to take a look at some of those. This is the next step. I think this is what we're going to be looking at very soon. Ukraine ups pressure on U.S. to allow strikes on Russia. Quote, this is insane. That is not my quote. Ukraine's struggle to fend off Russia's massive offensive in the Kharkov region has underscored a pressing issue that Kiev has long tried to overturn a ban on firing U.S. weapons to hit inside of Russia. So basically, what they're talking about here is they are going to. Let's do this. All right. So basically, what they're talking about here is that they're trying to allow the Ukrainians to basically. I don't think that there are much opportunities for them to use Storm Shadow or Scalp across the border, but to use their new long-range ATACMs that they've been given, like we've seen them successfully used on Crimea. They want to use them on Russian air bases, which has been strictly banned by the U.S. out of fear of escalation. Russia has said that they will consider an attack on Russia proper. And I think, honestly, guys, I personally think the Russians look at Crimea and Belgorod differently. So if there is a strike on Russia proper with U.S. weapons, the U.S. will be held responsible. Why is Victoria Nuland back? Oh, we'll get to that in a second, too. So this is the next step, guys. This is what's coming next, is the Ukrainians are going to really push hard and really try to get the West to allow them to strike like Russian airfields in Belgorod, Russian airfields in Kursk, that sort of stuff. And that is just such a steep escalation for this conflict. I don't think the West is going to allow it. And I would like to see how much free agency Ukraine really has with this stuff. Do the Ukrainians have glide bombs now? Yes, they've always had glide bombs. The glide bombs have a very difficult time dealing with Russian GPS jamming. So we've seen multiple articles where they say that these weapons basically don't work. We did see them get used in Kharkov for the first time successfully, but I mean, you're talking about raising air assets to drop glide bombs on Russians in a hospital. I mean, it's not really. It's just not. With the limited number of air assets you have, you don't usually use them in such a divvy way unless something is seriously wrong on the front, and that's what's happening. You're seeing a lot of weapon systems now being used inappropriately. HIMARS being used for frontline strikes and stuff like that. That's a bad sign. Let me think. Along with the glide bomb usage we saw on the hospital in Vovchansk, we also saw an Su-27 get shot down, and a pilot's obituary was announced. So, there's gives and takes to everything. You drop a couple of glide bombs, but you lose a pilot and an airframe. It's definitely not worth it. All right. What happened? What would happen if Ukraine strikes inside of Russia using American weapons? I'm pretty convinced right now that Ukraine is not going to exist in a couple of years as the state you see it at all today. The regime will be different. It might still be called Ukraine, but it's going to be a completely different Eastern Europe, guys. It's going to look very different in Ukraine. Belarus is going to look the same basically, but it's going to look very different. And I think that the Ukrainians are going to use American weapons on Russia. I don't think Russia's really going to do anything to the Americans. They don't really retaliate in that manner, but it's just another red line that's going to be crossed, and then more Ukraine disappears, and the ROE that Russia uses becomes looser and looser, and more Ukrainians die, and it becomes worse and worse and worse, right? So it's not a good step, but I fully expect it to happen. I've been waiting every day. Every time I hear a TACM strike on Crimea, it's like, well, at least they didn't do the stupid thing yet, right? Like, that's still dumb, but it's not quite striking Russia proper with U.S. weapons. So, okay. Next article. All right. Western aid to Ukraine is too slow. Risks from U.S. election limited, Zelensky says. So basically, Western allies are taking too long to make key decisions on military support for Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky told Reuters in an exclusive interview in Kiev on Monday. Clearly frustrated, he described the delivery of aid, in particular of air defenses like Patriot systems, which Ukraine relies heavily on in its war with Russia, as one big step forward, but before that, 2 steps back. Almost like they don't have any freaking systems to give you. Almost like you've shot all of their spare missiles. It's unbelievable. The negative impact Zelensky and his absolute dog tier foreign policy has had on the Ukrainian war effort has been noticeable and should be remembered through history. He is a actual clown who has put his foot in his mouth so many times and done so many stupid things that he could have done so much more damage to Russia if he would have just played the game better. So it's literally the only way I can explain it. All right. Okay, so this is sort of just a cope. I just want you guys to understand that this is propaganda. This is how propaganda is presented. Russia-Ukraine war. Latest: Putin loses more than 1,500 soldiers in faltering Kharkov offensive. Okay, first off, this number comes from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Boys, we do not listen to wartime MODs. We don't listen to the Russian MOD. We don't listen to the Ukrainian MOD. We can listen to them. We can hear what they say. But you always, before that, you put the caveat that this is probably a lie, right? So we have 1,500 soldiers in faltering Kharkov offensive. First off, 1,500 soldiers is the claim from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense of the entire front. So this is over 1,000-kilometer front line. This is not 1,500 soldiers in that little orange area of Kharkov. If they were losing 1,500 soldiers in that area of Kharkov a day, let me just be very clear, guys. It's been 7 days. That would be literally all of the soldiers Russia has basically for that operation dead. So this is again, you really have to learn how to read through this and understand what is real and what's fake. This number is, first off, incorrect. It's just an MOD copy paste based on no evidence or anything. They change it every day: 1,200, 1,800, 1,500, changes all the time. And also they word it so it makes it seem like this is happening all in one little section of the front. It's not happening. Russia has lost more than 1,500 soldiers in the past week in the grinding war in Kharkov, even as Vladimir Putin claimed. Okay, so then they just claim 1,500 soldiers in the past week, but I don't know where they get this number from either, because this is not, the Russians have not released any of their numbers, and this has to be a Ukrainian MOD number because 1,500 soldiers. Yeah, as of yesterday evening, Russia has lost 1,572 soldiers in just the last 7 days. I don't know where they got that number from. Where do they get that number from? Where the fuck do they get that number from? I am on this conflict 24/7. That has to be an MOD number. I don't know where that number comes from, but that's just 1,572. What the hell? What is that? Army vehicles and 8 tanks. Okay, well, hey, the Russians are losing more men than they have ever had in the region every day, and it's horrible. And then there's just no evidence of it anywhere. So yeah, that whole article right there is what you have to watch out for. That's a bunch of nonsense. And whoever wrote that, I can't believe they sat there and they had those numbers, and then do they just think and they look at it and go, nobody will even read this. Nobody's even going to read this. Because I read it and it didn't make any sense. So it's literally how it has to be. And one of the last bits of news that we need to talk about today is Europe just gained its newest dictator. Everybody, let's give it up. Let's give it up for Europe. One up in us. I got it. Europe has just gained its newest dictator, the Democratic term for the Ukrainian presidency that Zelensky was elected into has ended. It ended today. So Zelensky is the official new dictator of the world, but more importantly, Europe. I feel like being a dictator in Europe is a step above. Orban at least gets elected. Zelensky hasn't even been elected, right? I'm kind of joking, guys. It's you would not expect Ukraine to have elections right now. 20% of their country is occupied by the Russians, so you don't expect them to have legitimate elections. They didn't have legitimate elections when they did have legitimate elections, so it's a hard ask in peacetime. It's an impossible ask in wartime. But whether you become a dictator through your own means or through means that were put upon you by outside forces, you are still a dictator. He was a dictator before his presidential term ran out. He enacted martial law, which basically means he never has to leave. And he banned every political opposition party in the country. So if there was an election, he would be the only one running. He would win. He's a dictator. It's what it is. And I mean, this is not uncommon for this section of the world, so it's not a huge deal. But I am still going to make the joke that Europe now has its newest dictator, and people can be upset about that, but he is a dictator. Everything that he's doing, he's punching people. I mean, he's ordering his military enlistment officers to bag people, beat them up, put them in vehicles, and send them into the front line to die. So that's something a dictator does. What else? Oh, he embezzles and steals millions of dollars, so on and so forth. He is a textbook dictator, guys. He's just been dolled up by the West to look like a president, I guess. All right, guys. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the recent trip by Putin to Beijing. This was a very big deal. It was not talked about at all, but it was a very, very hold on. Zelensky could get all the weapons and vehicles in the world, and he's still for $70 trillion. Yeah, I know. It is true. I mean, there's nothing that the Ukrainians can receive that is going to replace their real issues, which is manpower. So, I mean, that's not going to change anytime soon. Anyway, this recent trip by Putin to Beijing to see Xi, he took his entire new government. That means the new Minister of Defense. He also took Shoigu, which, by the way, after the dust is settled, this only looks like a promotion for Shoigu. Shoigu does not seem to be distanced at all from Putin through this move. He was brought to Beijing in his new position. He seems like he just got promoted to a much nicer job for his I guess appetite. I don't know how you would say that. His what he seems like he wants to do, he's now doing it. It did not seem like the Minister of Defense job was really where he intended to spend a lot of his time. So he went with Putin. So did the new Minister of Defense, the new Minister of Industry, all of the new ministers that he put into his government went to Beijing. And basically, they came out of Beijing just flexing. I mean, not Russia, but Beijing and Moscow, both they went to this meeting. They made a lot of agreements. They're basically military allies in every sense of the word now, almost beyond that. They are now fully partnered up and standing up against the West together. The attitude in Beijing has changed entirely. They were more passive recently. Previously, throughout the SMO, being very careful with how they approached, Russia. And now, after, Yellen and Blinken went to Beijing to basically threaten Xi and China with sanctions if they continued to support the Russian war effort, which basically means trading with Russia. That there would be consequences, and China basically said, "Bring it on." I think that China is now it understands that there's no way around the confrontation that is coming with the West. and they are now getting ready for it fully. But mostly economically, I think that the Chinese are very, very, very much preparing for this war that is going to come with the United States. As the United States slips out of its hegemony and it becomes more and more desperate and it starts doing crazier and crazier things around the planet. Ukraine is just the beginning, guys. The U.S. is not going to go quietly into the night. It is going to claw and scratch and struggle, and it's not going to allow China and Russia to easily usurp its position in the globe. So get ready. What war? I mean, just the war that the United States is very clearly getting ready for. Just the war that all of that money we just gave to Ukraine is preparing us for. That random huge boost to the military industrial complex for no reason and all this talk of getting ready for China. That's the war we're talking about. Cute dog, though. Greetings from Cairo, Egypt. How do you think Russia will respond if NATO sends ground forces or made a no-fly zone outside of Ukraine? I think they would instantly strike whatever NATO assets came into the region. I think that the Russians are at a point where they understand that NATO is sort of this paper tiger when it comes to Ukraine. They've done everything that they can do, right? Besides directly going to war. And the West has made it very clear they don't want to do that. So the odds of NATO creating a no-fly zone or putting troops on the ground are slim to none. However, if there is some sort of European coalition that is put together by some European countries that are willing to go in and fight, those countries are going to be struck immediately. Russia has a very clear opportunity to send a very, very, very loud message and not invoke a NATO response, a military response from NATO. I think that they should do it. Now, whether they do it, that's up to them. You have to. It's always a gamble. You never know what the reaction is going to be. You never know what the response is going to be. But that's what I would do. I would send a very clear message. And it's not Americans, so it's a little different, right? I think that everybody can agree that if Americans died in Ukraine, it would be much different than some Poles or like somebody from Lithuania, just in terms of the reaction. Americans dying would be a very bad thing, in my personal opinion, considering the U.S. is a majority of NATO. When do you think Ukraine will get F-16s? I mean, weren't they supposed to already get them? The problem, guys, is not they can give them F-16s. The problem is they don't have pilots. They have 12 pilots, 24. Let's say they have 50 pilots ready to go right now. What base are you flying 50 F-16s out of? What air base in Ukraine are you flying F-16s out of? It's going to just get cratered immediately. The second you start preparing logistics for F-16s, it's going to be visible from space, and the Russians are just going to level whatever airfield you're preparing. The only way you can do that is if you're flying out of Romania or Poland, and the West knows that. That's why Berlin is offering up these ideas. But it's just lunacy, because exactly what I just talked about, the second planes start taking off from Poland, Poland becomes an active aggressor in the conflict and is no longer protected by Article 5 of NATO. It doesn't work. The whole NATO posture is broken. And Russia knows it. China knows it. Everybody knows it. They're out of options. They did this to themselves. We backed ourselves into a corner. We have nowhere to go. So the F-16s, I mean, the Ukrainians have lost. Let's say they get the 12 F-16s that they were promised by June with the 12 pilots. They have a base to fly out of. They've lost more Su-24s and Su-27s and MiG-29s since those F-16s were announced. So they're not even replacing the airframes that they've lost, that were doing the exact same job that these F-16s are going to do. F-16s are going to do what? Drop glide bombs maybe and launch Storm Shadows and Scalps. The Ukrainians are already doing that with Su-24s. So it doesn't do anything. When do you think the Ukrainian population will break and start revolting? Soon. I think we're getting to the point where that once the things on the battlefield start slipping very quickly, and they already are, it's going to become what I'm telling you guys. You are going to wake up one day in June, and a city is just going to be gone, And you're going to be like, what happened? And the Ukrainians are just going to have to pull out because they're getting surrounded. Their lines broke, something happened, and a city is just going to disappear, or it's going to be Russian. And everybody's going to go, what the hell is happening? And as soon as that happens, that's when the cascade comes. As soon as you can't hide it anymore, that's when the dam breaks. Question: how will the U.S. most likely try to provoke China into a war? How do they plan to supply Taiwan? So it's not the whole Taiwan thing is a pipe dream. They're not actually going to use Taiwan to defend or to fight China. You can't do that. They might try to use one of the other countries in the South China Sea as a battering ram, but Taiwan is just the means. Just like Ukraine was the means to levy the economic sanctions against Russia, right? The goal was not to beat Russia militarily. That's a ridiculous goal. And not because the Russians are so strong. It's not you don't go into it saying, I'm going to bait Russia into a war and then drown it in attrition in Ukraine. No, that's not what the goal was. I mean, maybe potentially, but as things developed, that's what the goal ended up becoming. But the initial goal was take the territories in the east back. This was before the war started in February 2022. Take the territories back, resolve the conflict, get Ukraine into the EU and NATO, suffocate Russia, call Russia's bluff. Russia had been posturing at the border with 150,000 troops, 100,000 troops every single year. This was a routine. They did it. And I think the U.S. was just finally at the point where they were like, okay, Biden is our president. He is going to be the president for the next couple of years. We can get this done now. The whole Ukraine thing was supposed to happen during Hillary Clinton, I believe. I believe all of that was supposed to happen near the end of Clinton's first term into her second term potentially, or whoever came in and replaced her. I believe that's what it was supposed to be. That's when Ukraine was supposed to happen. It was delayed until the Biden administration. And then the Biden administration tried to basically call Russia's bluff. Russia then followed through with their threat, invaded Ukraine. And on the back of that, the U.S. said, if Russia calls the bluff, then we'll just beat Russia with sanctions. And that's what they tried to do. The sanctions failed, and then everything else has been just trying to make something work. Oh, war of attrition. We're going to make Russia regret invading, and they're never going to be able to do it again, blah, 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 blah. That's all plan C and D that was developed after plan A failed and plan B also failed, which plan B was the sanctions, right? So that's how that worked. And the goal was regime change in Russia, pull Russia away from China, then we can go focus on China. China is now in the position where they have their energy partner in Russia. They have Russia, who has been completely distanced from the West and is now solely focused on the Asian market. That's the worst thing. This is why I'm so frustrated, is because the U.S. was the hegemony. We had the opportunity to be the greatest in the world and maintain it forever. Geographically, I mean, barring some crazy nonsense, we had it. We had it all perfect. We have a breadbasket. We have minerals. We have everything. We have the setup, and we went and threw it away in this greedy, immature way. It's just horrible to watch. It's like you have a 3-0 lead in an NBA series, and then you just throw 4 games in a row. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah, and it's just continuously happening over and over again. So what the goal probably was, I don't know if it's still the goal after the failure with Russia, is to get China to be aggressive with Taiwan. As soon as they cross that line and they create the opportunity, then you sanction the shit out of them, destroy their economy, cause regime change, cause a collapse, and then 1991 China. I mean, what they did to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's exactly what they wanted to do to Russia again, and that's exactly what they were planning on doing to China. It's a good strategy if you commit to it and you make it work. But we didn't. We half-assed it, and we pretended, and we thought we could get around certain aspects of it and not go through the hardships of what it actually takes to get that shit done. And we failed, and we're going to continue to fail. And I'm just going to continue watching my fucking country nosedive into the ground as we continue to fail on the world stage. We embarrass ourselves on the world stage, and that reflects on me, and that reflects on my culture and my history and my family and everything. And I'm not going to sit here and take that. So that's why I'm on here talking, guys. And I appreciate you all on here watching and listening. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. I'm going to wrap it up there. That is an hour. My throat is destroyed from talking. I appreciate you all so much. If you would like to support me, guys, go subscribe to that Patreon. I will be recording a video, I think tomorrow. I have a lot of footage to cover. That first video was fun to make, so I'm gonna make another one of those, the demonetized series. So if you guys are looking for a little bit more content for me, something a little bit more risque, you can go check that out. That is a lot more combat footage and stuff like that. I dissected a little bit more and talk about some more events with the actual war aspect instead of just the mapping and everything. Also, go follow me on my Telegram and Twitter, guys, to stay up to date with everything going on with me. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you all. Take care. Have a great day and be safe. Love you.